עושה שלום ברמה, הוא יעשה shalom. May the one who makes peace from heaven above, we say, hu yaseh shalom.
So we mentioned that Rabbi Sandra is going to be joining us for Shabbat this week. We talked all about how she was going to teach Torah on Shabbat morning during Torah study, going to lead a program after services tonight, going to give a Dvar Torah in the middle of the service tonight, but I don't think anyone mentioned that she was also one of the foremost singers and especially songwriters in our movement, composing new liturgical music. So it's one of those well-kept secrets about Sandra, you know, that in between all the wonderful institutional work that Rabbi Lawson does for our movement, and then previously as Hill director and chaplain at Ilan. She's also an incredibly talented liturgical songwriter. And so what a privilege. I often harmonize in my car to your Say Shalom.
Thank you.
And so this is the first time we got to do that in person, and it feels really nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to go sit out there with all y'all.
Oh.
And
yeah. Well, we're gonna talk. Okay, so I as Ilana said, I used to work with college students, so I really don't mind being interrupted. And I do have words here. I do. And I also know that I am a representative of our movement, even though the movement is just down the street. And so I might be saying things that are familiar to you, or you may have questions. And so I'll invite you to ask those questions if you want to, or wait till after the service to ask those questions. But I have 10 minutes, which might be a little flexible. I'm going to give you, yes. And so I'm going to talk a bit about the work that I do and what's going on with Reconstructing Judaism around inclusivity and race. And I titled this, Building Bridges, Advancing Racial Justice Within our Movement. And I know some of you may have some questions. And so before I begin, I'm gonna give a little kavanah, which should be familiar to many of you all because, we say the Shechianu when you do something for the first time. And this is the first time I've actually been up here in this congregation. I used to teach the school a long time ago. So and also you say a Shechianu moment when you do something, when you have a long-awaited event has come, and we've been planning this for a while. So please join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechianu v'yimanu v'higyanu lazman hazeh. Take some liberties here. Blessed are you, sovereign of all things, who has given us life, sustained us, and allowed us to reach this occasion. Thank you for allowing me to be in this community. I know I've only been here for a short time, and I wish it was longer, and I'm just really feeling the love. And so as we gather in this Shabbat, the Shabbat haGadol, the great Shabbat, like I'm on the great Shabbat. As we gather, let us embrace the spirit of renewal and reflection, and may our discussion tonight on racial justice, equity, and inclusion not only honor the diversity of our community, but also strengthen our commitment to building a just and compassionate world, and let us be guided by wisdom, inspired by compassion, and moved to action by principles of justice and peace. Amen. All right. So before I begin any discussion, my thing is it's always grounded in Torah. And so we are in Torah Metzorah. And it's a portion that often challenges contemporary readers with its detailed rituals for purification and the treatment of the Zra'at. A condition traditionally often translated as leprosy. There's some debate around that, but a condition that many people have sort of also called a spiritual illness that manifested itself physically. I mean, think about it. Sometimes we can get so messed up in our head, or so stressed out about stuff, it does come out of our bodies. And um, when I was writing this and reading that, I want to actually do some more reading about that, because there's always gems in the Torah portion, because we're reading the Torah portion through whatever's going on in our lives in that moment, and things just sort of jump out at us, and then we move on to the next thing, the next Torah portion. So um, in this Torah portion, I see a powerful metaphor for the societal ills of exclusion, and the process is necessary for healing and reintegration. And just as the person afflicted undergoes purification to rejoin the community, we too are called upon to identify and cleanse the afflictions of prejudice, injustice, racism, homophobia, and all the ills of our society. And this purification is not just for the individual. I say that I'm going to pause there, because I think often when we think about issues of inclusion, we're thinking about race as far as like that black person over there, that brown person over there, but it's really about all of us. We live in a society that has identified all of us by a racial category, and unfortunately, the folks that get focused on are people who are not marked as white. So anyway, this purification process is not just for the individual, but it involves the community's active participation in the healing process. The community's active participation in the healing process. So, in reconstructing Judaism's commitment to racial diversity, equity, inclusion, we recognize that, like this week's Torah portion, our society carries marks of exclusion and ongoing disparities that require communal recognition and action. And this process, outlined in this week's Torah portion, can inspire us to take deliberate steps towards healing, emphasizing that returning to a state of wholeness is both a personal and communal journey. And we fully integrated into the fabric of our communities. So let's talk about advancing racial justice and equity in the Reconstructionist movement. And I'm going to give you some background before as we do that. So I don't want to just jump in and start talking about that. I want to tell you how we went from how we got here in a short period of time. And Maurice is here too, so he can hear some things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So as we reflect on this Torah portion, let's consider how we as a community can act and identify and address and heal the wounds related to racism and all the ills of our society. So the American Jewish community is becoming more racially diverse. Excuse me, let me rewind. Scratch that. More diverse. I give these talks a lot, and so like I said, I have words on the page to keep me to my time, but often I just go off script sometimes. So anyway, the American Jewish community is becoming more diverse. And when I say that, what I am saying is basically the longer Jews live in this country, the more we are a microcosm of what you see in American society. So that means more LGBTQIA people. I mean, you have two women identified folks, persons sorry, who are married to women. Like, that is like awesome. Like, that is so cool. Anyway, more LGBTQIA folks were becoming browner and more diverse politically. That's really important to understand at this moment that we have arrived in. Um, and so the same demographics you see in American society, you are going to see in the American Jewish community. The same things that are happening outside, we are not exempt from. You will see them playing out in our community. And as many of you may know, the Reconstructionist movement emerged in the early part of the 20th century, emerged in the early 20th century, growing out of the conservative movement. Saying that to my non-Reconstructionist friends, that's kind of shocking to them, but we grew out of the conservative movement, and based on the ideals of Rabbi Dr. Mordecai Kaplan. And the movement has always prided itself on inclusivity. And it is rooted in progressive ideals and Jewish tradition. And central to the Reconstructionist philosophy is the concept that Judaism is not only a religion, but a dynamic cultural system shaped by Jewish people over time. So our progressive values shape our Judaism over time because we are an evolving civilization. Kaplan's teachings emphasize that Jewish tradition and culture are created from the ground up and not ordained from the top down, and this underscores our alignment with modern values of equality and social justice. So, 2021, the Board of Governors of Reconstructing Judaism adopted a 5-year strategic plan. And the purpose of this plan was to adapt to rapidly changing ways in which individuals and communities seek connection, meaning particularly changes accelerated by the pandemic. A lot of things happened from that pandemic. And the strategic plan was meant to reinforce core Reconstructionist commitments while innovating new approaches to meet contemporary challenges. And the plan aims to evolve Jewish community practices and promote healing, foster engagement, advance justice, renewal, ensuring that the movement remains relevant and impactful in our society. Now, a significant portion of the strategic plan is where I come in, which is section 4. Now, I am biased, but I actually think our strategic plan is actually really cool and fun to read. And there's also shorthand. There's like, cool executive summary with pictures and charts and arrows. So go check it out. So section 4 of our strategic plan sort of showcases that we are dedicated to joining and leading Jewish efforts to dismantle systemic racism and promote racial equity, diversity, and inclusion within the Reconstructionist movement. In 2021, and I was hired in 2021. In 2021, we started a pilot loosely called the Reconstructing Judaism, the pilot congressional assessment tool for racial diversity, equity, and inclusion. I created it, and I don't think I actually have a real name for it, but I think that's the working title. But the purpose of this tool, when I was hired, and thinking about as we were creating our strategic plan, I insisted on I wanted Reconstructing Judaism to find a way to assess our congregations, no judgment, just assess our congregations on where they were on racial diversity, racial inclusion, and all those things, for several reasons. To ensure the safety and inclusion of Jews of color that were already in our communities, that were coming to our communities. We wanted to understand better about their experiences. And then once we started looking into this, we actually had to I had to go back a little bit more and um, get congregations to have conversations so that they could understand where they actually were. And one of the things that I found out from this process in my conversations with folks is that I believe, now I'm also very clear, I am a talking head for our movement, but I also, when I say I'm really speaking about myself. Um, I believe that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion subgroups in a congregation are not effective enough to change the culture. That doesn't mean that they're wrong, and it doesn't mean if you have one, I'm not saying stop it, but I'm just saying if you really want to change the culture in your community, it must start with the leadership. And that means the leadership that gets hired, and also people have leadership that's granted to them just from their time in the synagogue. They may be a previous board member who has done every job in the synagogue, and they hold power in the community. And the other thing I wanted to make sure was to reduce the level of biases that our growing number of rabbinical students were facing, and not just in our movement, but also across the movement, and to ensure that our growing racial diversity of rabbis coming through our college were going to be able to be their awesome selves and lessen the biases they would experience. Right now, RRC has 4 Black rabbinical students. One of them is about to be ordained. And so our Rabbinical Association currently has 5 rabbis of color. And when Dr. Koach Baruch Fraser walks across the stage, it'll be another person. And I want to make sure that they experience less of what previous generations have experienced, previous generations of rabbis of color. And the last thing I'll say before I take questions is, so we adopted the strategic plan in 2021. We piloted the assessment tool that I just mentioned with 7 congregations and hope to expand that. And then in 2021, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College adopted its reparations resolution, and in 2023, the Reconstructed Judaism adopted its resolution for reparations, meaning our entire movement supports reparations. And so now we get to have fun. You get to ask me questions.
This is where I walk to the microphone.
Okay.
Actually, I have a question about process here.
Yeah.
And this question about process goes to both you, Rabbi Sandra, and also to Elisa. Do we want to do Q&A, micro Q&A now on this piece of the talk, or do we want to hold Q&A until after the service as part of the larger program following the service?
I'm happy to do it now when it's fresh in people's minds. I'm worried if we do it later, people will try to leave.
Micro Q&A, fair. Micro Q&A now. Melissa, and if you're online, you can raise your hand visually or use the raise hand button. Melissa.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so pleased that you're here.
Thank you.
I just wanted you, I'm not going to get the words right, but I want to ask you to expand on one phrase that you said because it surprised me a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think you said, in speaking about the upcoming graduating students of color at RRC, that they're facing increasing bias.
I want to lessen the bias. And I might, if I said increasing, I don't recall. But right now, Jewish clergy of color, so cantors, rabbis, and other folks, are facing microaggressions and just flat out racism. Shorthand, having their time wasted. So if we have rabbis of color, and I actually had a conversation with a cantor recently. There's 2 Black cantors. Well, there's 1 Black cantor in Michigan and one that is about to be the first female Black cantor in the country. Her name is Jenny Ash. And if a congregation has not dealt with their racial bias. That means they might just ignore it. And don't ignore it. You need to, if it's coming up, you need to deal with it, you need to address it. Because when you bring a candidate in and you're like, oh, we have this diverse pool of candidates, and the background noise in the community has no intention of hiring that person. You may have the best of intentions, but somebody in that community who may have some level of power is like, there's no way we are ready for or hiring a black rabbi, meaning, or a black rabbi or a brown rabbi, meaning, and then that person is going through the process in your community, not your community, but a community. And this process, depending on the community, and Maurice can attest to this, can take anywhere, I'm just using calendar dates, anywhere from January to June. And then if you love the candidate, you bring the candidate down, and that process can take 3 to 5 days. And then if that candidate goes all the way through the process, and then the community decides, well, we really like you, but we're just going to stop this and start it over, which happens, or we really can't hire you because people have decided this isn't okay. You've wasted everybody's time. And also, by the way, our being a member of a rabbinical association comes with ethics. And there is a point in the process, usually when you start negotiating, where you cannot negotiate with more than one community at a time. And so if you're going through that process and all of a sudden this stuff comes up and they just can't, now that person is completely out of a job, and infecting their family. And what I want to do and what our movement wants to do is lessen that. Now, I wish I had the power to say it would go away, but that's just not the case. Does that help? I know I probably spent more time on that question. But.
I just thought I heard you say the word increasing, and that was, but I'm glad you unpacked it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, but also I want to say too, on that note, Melissa, is that on some way, since you brought it up, it is increasing because one example I use is that when neighborhoods start to get integrated, and so one black family moves in a white neighborhood, great, look, that's so awesome. And then another black family moves in, that's great. And then a third one, and you're like, oh, we're becoming a black neighborhood. And then people start to exit.
There goes the rabbinate.
Right, and so the racism that didn't exist in that community before the black families came is now alive and well. So that in that way, it's increasing. Yeah.
Also very happy to have you.
Thank you.
See you in person.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a bit more about what you learned from the pilot study, or what the experience was like working with the sort of what came out from the congregations. You're saying, or you said, I think, something about how it's fine if you have like some subgroup working on anti-racism, but this is really a congregational issue. So if we at Or Hadash are sort of saying, okay, what does that mean here? It'd be really interesting to hear what you learned from the congregations that you piloted, self-assessment.
Yeah. So what I've learned from this process. So let me back up a minute to what? Yeah. No. It's all because we all kind of learn together because it's a reconstructionist process. So one of the things that I learned before we started testing folks is that I had a lot of conversations. I had a lot of conversations with rabbis, and it was I was saddened to hear from colleagues that I know, friends, who would say to me, I know there is racism in my congregation, and I don't know what to do about it, so I'm not going to do anything. To which I replied, that is completely irresponsible. And my response to one person in particular was, and this helped her understand, I said, you know that rabbinical school only teaches you so much, only so much. And so when I arrived at my first job, I had a wonderful shofar blower, amazing. I've never heard the shofar sound so pretty in my life. I mean, it was just amazing. And then he graduated which is what they do, I didn't have a shofar blower. None of my other students knew how to do it. I couldn't find one on campus, and which meant, right, well, I didn't actually know how to do it, but that meant that I had to really find a student, and I actually found a parent's child, which worked out great. I had to find somebody else to do it. I had to hire somebody to do it, or I had to learn to blow it myself. But I couldn't say, well, we don't have one, and we're just not going to do it. And she's like, oh. So part of what I did was the rabbis in this pilot study learned with the congregations. So they learned with their leadership. So it's facilitated by the rabbis, but they're learning together. And the best part of all of this is that it built a sense of trust with the leadership. The study could be replicated as the board changed over. There was no more questioning about what people thought or believed, and they were all on the same page of the things that they could do. And also what I would tell people, and I still tell people today, this is one step and maybe like one tip of your pinky toenail into the water, and it's a start to get you onto something, but it's not going to be like, oh, we're done. But basically, what I heard from people who gave me the most pushback initially in this process was that talking about racism was not the scary boogie person, and it was enjoyable because they got to know each other better.
Any other questions for this part of the talk? We're very quiet. Well then,
Aaron
Rabbi
has a question.
Aaron, and then
Yeah.
we'll pause here.
I just realized there's a lot of rabbis in here. It's kind of cool.
Welcome to Philadelphia.
I know. Are there any other rabbis around that I don't know about? Okay.
Rabbi Aaron.
There was a discussion on the educators board the last couple days, maybe, and someone, George Kelly, posted that a preschool teacher had just pointed out how many of the bad guys in the Purim and Passover stories in the children's book had very dark complexions compared to the lily white Israelites.
Yeah.
And that some people said, yeah, well, we've stopped using some stories because of that problem, which we would absolutely do here. And so then people were like, but we really like some of the stories. And so I talked about at a previous congregation having the teenagers use like Crayola crayons and color over the skin. So, recolor, so like the Israelites then had like brownish skin as well, because you can't really lighten the dark, scary characters. And so then another person wrote to me and wrote back, and another preschool teacher, and she said, well, she's white, and she did that once, and a person of color who was another teacher told her that was really offensive because she was highlighting the fact that the people of color were an afterthought. And I actually, so their conversation ended there.
Okay.
And I've been kind of like playing out the conversation that they needed to have because I feel like the person of color's perspective is equally valid to the intention of the white person. And I felt like the systemic thing is then, like, here, Rabbi Lana and I would have just talked about, like, we would have told everyone, look at this, and we're doing this because, and it's sort of like, I think it goes with what you're saying, that the stop happens if there's no conversation.
Right.
It's like, here's this person's perspective and this person's, and neither part wants to offend the other, so they stop the conversation.
Right.
Like, they just don't dialogue. And the systemic thing is to have the director say, here are the different perspectives and here are the common goals. And is that an example of how we would try and talk about it on it? Take
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
something from like a microaggression thing to a systemic point of dialogue?
Yeah, like all those things are totally valid and accurate. And what you start to learn are the layers, the layers that just you peel off one and then there's another and there's another and there's another. And you're peeling off 400 years of layers. As you were talking, Aaron, there is a king quote that I'm trying to pull from up here that says that goes that the intent of the quote is something like someone uh, created the colors black and white. And that is the black, everything assigned to the color black in an individual is bad and dark and scary and big or whatever. But everything associated with the color white is light and pretty or whatever. And he said, go read stuff. You'll start to see it. And one of the things that I say is that when communities are having these conversations, to be aware of who's in the room and who's not in the room. And so if you're talking about colored people in a book and it's only white people talking, that does not mean go find a black person. But what it does mean is that you're having a conversation together and you're trying to make the best decision, but then down the road, that might need to change as more people come into the conversation. And then if that needs to change, it's not the time to be like defensive or whatever, just continue those conversations and also maybe bring the person into the history of how we got to where we are and then include them. And then you actually, the more voices that are in these conversations over time, you go from like this little circle of Jews to like this bigger circle, and you actually get a better reflection of who we are as a people. But you're doing the right thing, and it's not easy.
So we're going to pause here and conclude our service. Then we're going to turn back to a more of this conversation, but from a different angle.
Yeah.
In this, first of all, I want to thank you for teaching us Torah today. And I can now not use two microphones. That's just strange. Okay. We re-enter our service at the Mishaberach L'Cholim, at our prayer for healing and wholeness. And I know that one of the initiatives within the Department of Thriving Communities right now and within the racial DEIJ work is a work around tikkun and healing, healing for those, especially for folks of color, who have felt hurt within their Jewish congregational community life. And so I want to offer as a kavanah, as an intention tonight for our Mishaberach L'Cholim, that we hold all of those who we know, friends, community members, partners of our children, our own children themselves, cousins, neighbors, Jews of color who we know, who we have heard personal experiences from in our lives, who have felt marginalized within or pushed out or just felt like being part of Jewish community took way too much emotional energy and it just was not worth it. And we hold all of them in our hearts for healing and wholeness tonight. And we also hold any part that we may, those of us in this space who are white, who are coded as white, who are seen as white, may have done either wittingly or unwittingly to be a part of that culture. And we also hold in our hearts and are thinking of for healing and wholeness